You guys know what time it is. Time for NSIC Stock Watch with David Brown. We got to see who's up, who's down, everything in between. But as always, David, we have to keep you honest.
Honesty is always the best policy.
We do. And we're going to take a look at last week's advice because you've had a few off weeks, David. But you said to buy more of Minnesota State, and that is always good advice. Mavericks steamroll Wayne State 55-2.
Got
You
that
read that correctly. You sold Northern State. They survived a scrappy UMary team, 28-23 up in Bismarck. And you said to hold on Sioux Falls. They ran over Upper Iowa 34-7. So with Minnesota State and Minnesota Duluth as the only undefeateds and every other NSIC team having at least 3 losses, who are you buying this week?
A little tough to buy besides the top 2 teams, of course, but I'm going to buy a little more stock in Augustana. Augie is one of those 6 different teams with a 6-3 overall record. Those teams all fighting for a spot in the Mineral Water Bowl at this point. I don't know if the Vikings are going to have an impressive enough overall resume to get that mineral water spot, but I do now know why I'm buying more stock. They're just road warriors, plain and simple. 5-0 on the road this season after this past Saturday's dominating victory over Concordia St. Paul. Perhaps the caliber of opponents isn't as great for Augustana on the road as it is at home, but you know what? It doesn't matter. You play who's on your schedule. You can't help that. The fact that every single time the Vikings have gotten on a bus this season, they've come back victorious, says something about how they prepare throughout the week. Credit to head coach Jerry Olszewski and credit to the rest of his staff. They're already 2 games better than last season with 3 to go. They're in contention, as I said, for the Mineral Water Bowl, and they still have room to grow overall, so I like the direction that they're heading in, which is why I'm going to buy the Road Warriors in Augustana this week.
All right, respectable. Well, at this point in the season, it's hard to sell on anyone because most of their playoff fates have already been decided. So who is it this week?
I'm going to get a little bit creative with this one, and I'm going to think a little outside the box. I'm going to sell MSU Moorhead for now. I get it. They're also 6-3 like Augustana, and they just come off a win at home. Minot State, they beat them handily, but I think this is an instance of selling high on a team and then possibly buying back low for next season. The last 2 games for the Dragons are against fellow 6-3 squads, Bemidji State and St. Cloud State, both of whom have better experience against some of the more established programs, so I don't like the Dragons' odds in either of those games, but I still like a lot of what I see in MSU Moorhead. They have 2 great receivers in Grady Bresnahan and Jake Richter, who are only sophomores. I think there's some solid defensive playmakers as well who will continue to grow within the program, but to me, it's a wait-and-see type of approach. I think that they're a buy low candidate heading into next season, just because we've empirically seen instances where we thought the Dragons would be able to take next step year after year, but they haven't quite gotten there. So sell for now, re-examine in 2019. I like what I see, but just not quite enough yet.
Not yet. Fun fact, my dad's old email address was buylow at aimretail.net.
No wonder you love this segment so much.
Exactly, I love it, but don't email that. I think it's discontinued. Anyways, buying the Vikings, selling the Dragons. Who do you hold on this week?
I'm going to hold on Bemidji State, and I didn't sell them last week after they got crushed at home against Minnesota State. This past weekend, they bounced back, got a big road win at St. Cloud State. The Beaver stock is kind of right in the middle right now, so that's why I'm holding. There isn't an argument to be made about buying low or selling high. Bemidji State is just a solid team that's still kind of a mystery. The defense has always been phenomenal in terms of creating turnovers. You saw that again this past week, John Vogler with the pick 6 there. I'm intrigued to see how they're going to be with Brandon Alt back from his knee injury next season at quarterback. Their 2 backups, Alec Ogden, Jared Heading, they've been okay, not really spectacular. Alt showed the ability to stretch the field early in the season. That arm, combined with their typically stout defense, could have made for a different story for Bemidji State this season. Alas, they're still fighting, still scrapping, maybe trying to get that Mineral Water Bowl spot. I say hold for now just because I think they could go either way.
All right, well, once again, no market trend this week. We have buy, sell, and hold. But a look at the region ranking. So last week, Minnesota Duluth was first, Minnesota State was second. This week, some flip-flopping. Minnesota State actually moves from number 2 to number 1, but Minnesota Duluth falls from number 1 to number 3. Ouch. Tarleton State from Texas and the Lone Star Conference is up to number 2. St. Cloud State, by the way, was 9th last week, but thanks to their loss against Bemidji State, they are out of the top 10. So David, looking at this as a whole, what are your thoughts?
Well, this is kind of what I was discussing last week, where I said strength of schedule was going to become a major factor. Minnesota Duluth, through no fault of its own, played a 1-win Minnesota Crookston team, and they demolished them 63-7. And they end up dropping 2 spots. Minnesota State destroys a 2-win Wayne State team 55-2, and they move up one spot. Tarleton State sneaks in between those two NSIC schools because they beat a fellow ranked team. They were number 7 this week, MSU Texas. These are just the realities of this mathematical formula. And here's the big thing, though, in my mind. Even if the unthinkable happens, and both these teams lose their final 2 games to end up at 9-2, we're talking about Minnesota State, Minnesota Duluth, they're still both going to make the playoffs, in my opinion. The issue is, as undefeated teams with national championship aspirations, you don't want to make the playoffs. Making the playoffs is not the goal. You want to play for a high seed. Yeah. You can only play who's on your schedule. So for both the Mavericks and the Bulldogs, they just need to win out, let the chips fall where they may, and see if they can reach those ultimate goals.